How can education leaders help staff move from AI anxiety to AI optimism and fluency? How can we make sure that pedagogy always trumps technology in our classrooms? And how can we promote the kind of disruptive thinking necessary to future-proof our learners for an unpredictable world? Welcome back to another episode of the Teachers on Fire podcast, airing live on YouTube most Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern. My name is Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Today's Teacher on Fire is Eric Sheninger. Eric works with schools throughout the world, helping educators meet and exceed their potential to improve outcomes for learners. He is the founder and CEO of Aspire Change EDU, a collaborative consultancy designed to provide personalized support to all education systems. Prior to this, he was a teacher and the award-winning principal at New Milford High School. You can connect with Eric on LinkedIn, on X at @E_Sheninger, on Instagram at @E_Sheninger, on YouTube, also at Eric Sheninger, and on his website at ericsheninger.com. Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show today, my friend. Are you ready to light it up?
Great to be here, Tim. And I don't know about lighting it up, but I'm going to try my best. So let's see where the conversation goes.
All right. Well, I'm excited to get into it. This has been a long time coming for sure. And you've got a lot to share. You've been sharing it far and wide. And I'm just so honored to have you on the program this morning. So thank you so much for joining me. First question for you is regarding your latest book, Personalized, Meeting the Needs of All Learners. It's still less than a year old, so I'm sure it feels for you like it's been around for a while, but still fairly recent. How would you summarize your thesis and your main message for educators in this book?
Yeah, there's a lot that I can say. First, I think, there is a lot of stigma attached to personalization. Most people equate it to technology. Let's put all students on a device, have them use an adaptive learning tool. That is not personalization. Personalized learning is all students getting what they need when and where they need it to learn. Can technology help personalize? Of course it can. Another myth that I've been hearing on social media is, people say, oh, yeah, there's no such thing as personalization. All learning is personal. Correct. Learning is personal, but all learning is not personalized. When we think about personal learning, it's how we construct meaning, how we construct new knowledge, our preferences. That is personal, but personalized relies on high agency strategies to truly create an experience that meets the needs of all learners, taking into account voice, choice, path, pace, place. And it's something that my co-author, Nikki Saw, and I really emphasized is, when it comes to learning, there's not one right way to learn. And that is true for all of us. What we do need to realize, and the book is really kind of a calling to move away from all students doing the same thing at the same time, the same way. That is impersonal. And it really flies in the face of, the personal aspect of personalized.
Next question is somewhat similar. It's definitely related, but you talked about how technology doesn't have to always play a role. We know that it can, and I see that on your X feed and elsewhere. So let's talk about that for a moment. How can leaders leverage technology and personalized learning frameworks together to systematically support and scale critical evidence-based learning initiatives?
Yeah, I think the first thing is when we look at, I kind of want to address just the term leader first. When we think about leadership is not about title, position, or power. Leadership is about action. And when we think about actions, you can be a classroom leader, you can be a building leader, you can be a district or system leader. I get to do what I do, not because of what I did as the principal with the title. It's because of what my teachers actually did in the classroom to improve student outcomes, to integrate technology in a purposeful way. So to tackle the question, when we think about the role of teacher, building, district, system, division leadership, it's that purposeful use. And that's where, technology has kind of been made the scapegoat across the world. We're seeing the
Hmm.
headlines now. Let's get kids on paper and pencil. Let's get the technology out. Well, because what happened was it was not implemented, integrated, infused in a purposeful way. You know, it's kind of like where I said before about personalization, all students doing the same thing at the same time, in the same way. Same thing with technology, just putting students on a device, having them go on one of the myriad of adaptive learning tools. That's not purposeful use. And I think when we look at getting the most bang for our buck, we want to ensure that the technology supports and enhances learning outcomes. I always I always kind of pose these two questions to educators when I do workshops, keynotes. Question number one: how are students using technology to learn in ways they couldn't without it? Number two: how does your use as an educator, has your technology use represent a fundamental improvement over what you did in the past without it? If you can't answer those questions, don't force the technology. One
Hmm.
of the best, most practical ways that I try to convey the use of tech is, I want to see a good lesson. When I think about a mini lesson, I got no issue with direct instruction, whole group, as long as we're bringing in the hooks, the reviews of prior learning, the checks of understanding, the turn and talk. But then when we get the closure, oh my goodness, well, why don't we give a scaffolded, easy, moderate, challenging question that all students can answer on a self-graded Canvas or Google form and get that immediate feedback? When we connect it to aspects of personalization, one of the frameworks I developed really looks at high agency practices. When we think about student voice, technology could be used to give all students the opportunity to respond to an effective strategy, such as review of prior learning, checks for understanding, closure. So it could amplify voice. Choice: students can, choose to select a tool to demonstrate their understanding. Path: they can follow their path based on where they are within standards and competency using an adaptive tool. Place: students can learn virtually if they choose to. If we have routers outside, students can learn outside. So when we think about, all those aspects, that's the key with the technology: is it purposeful? Is it aligned to our goals? Does it help students actually learn?
Hmm. That was so good. Wow. You write about AI assisted leadership in schools, and you were just talking about asking education leaders, how is the technology actually allowing you to do more than previously? So, on the same thought there, how can education leaders use AI as a force multiplier for their own work to automate the mundane and actually increase their human presence in the building?
Yeah, it's so interesting that there's two, you know, AI is so polarizing.
Yeah, it
We
really is.
hear that, oh my goodness, it's going to eradicate our jobs and all this stuff. And here's the thing, I always come back to when we look at our practice. I reflect on Simon Sinek's golden circle: is instead of focusing on the what, let's think about, well, why do we do things the way we do them?
Hmm.
How might we do it more effectively? And what tells us if we're successful? And when we think about the AI should be the what. I always say I don't want to see an AI designed lesson plan, because that devalues the role of the educator in the classroom, because they know their students, they know their standards. So when we think about leadership, the point is, why do you lead the way you do? How can you lead more effectively? And what aspects of AI can streamline your work? So, before AI, I developed a framework for pedagogical leadership. We often so focus on instruction. Instruction is what the teacher does. Learning is what the students do. So I try to shift my own thinking about the pedagogical practices that are so vital to creating a vibrant learning experience. And when we think about the aspects, I kind of just went back to, okay, well, let me look at this framework and let's look at developing relationships. And, AI can help leaders reclaim time, where they can buy back those minutes so that they can focus more on the face to face conversations, the phone calls, the handwritten notes, building those relationships. When we think again also about time, AI can curate resources and research like never before. And one thing that I always did as a principal way back, going back almost 20 years ago, is I use Google Scholar to align research to every piece of feedback that I provided to my teachers. Why?
Mm.
Because I didn't want them to think it was my opinion. Oh, you need to do closure. You need wait time. You need to scaffold your questions. No, I use questions to drive them to their own conclusion of where they can improve. And then when they saw that, when the light bulb went on, I said, hey, by the way, here's the research that supports it. You can take any practice and find peer-reviewed research in seconds. I also create now anchor charts. When I go in and coach, I provide 2,000 to 5,000 words of feedback within 24 hours to the
Hmm.
systems that I support. But
Wow.
what I can do then is I can have AI analyze the feedback that I've already written, and I can create visuals to create clearer context on what we're talking about. Analyzing evidence. What I do is, going back to the reports in some of my systems, I've done 3 coaching cycles already. So I can put all of those reports into AI and analyze it against state standards, evaluation frameworks, anything that a system is focused on. And then the AI will analyze that and provide sample goals. But it can also look, I can take a picture of a learning target and I can find out immediately. AI will tell me if it's aligned to a standard, what grade level it's focused on. It saves me time, but I have to be able to analyze and determine, hey, what makes a good learning target? As we continue to think about the feedback piece, leaders can use AI to personalize the feedback. If they understand that closure is needed in a calculus class, if they can identify that standard, AI can help them develop more targeted personal feedback for that teacher, even if they weren't a calculus person like me. And then finally, learning together. When we think about what AI can do, AI can provide thinking about prompts, it can provide ideas, hooks, conversation starters. So when we think about AI as a force multiplier, going back to what I talked about with the technology piece, how can AI support and enhance the work we are already doing to free up time to do what truly matters?
You gave so many great examples there. I want to go back to the infographic. I thought that was really cool. When you take 5,000 words of feedback, I hope I have that right, and sort of boil that down into an infographic, which tool are you using for that? Are you going to Gemini for that, or which one is doing
You
the
know,
trick for you
I,
right
I
now?
think that's a great question because when I sit down and model AI use for whether it's teachers, leaders, what I show them is sometimes it really depends on what I'm looking for. So
Sure.
you mentioned the uh, the AI assisted leadership. The image that I used for that blog post was created in Gemini. However,
Mhm.
if I want to create a template for station rotation, for must do, may do, for a choice board, I go to ChatGPT. I don't know why, but ChatGPT seems to create better images when I'm looking for templates
Mm.
and infographics. But if I really want something that pops, that's nuanced, that is at a higher level, I then go to Gemini. I used the same prompt last week for station rotation. And what I got in ChatGPT was a lot more that I was looking for than in Gemini, but then
Mm.
vice versa. And one of my favorite prompts, Tim, in Gemini is create a metaphorical image for. And if you put what you're looking for, oh my goodness, that's where I get a lot. Now, sometimes I'll say, hey, I need to take my existing framework and align it with these aspects of AI. That's what I did for the AI assisted leadership post. So I really think that we shouldn't put all our eggs in the same basket. I think tools, even with the same prompt, can create different products, which I think is fascinating. But then, my go-to tool is Canva to take what's created in AI, because then I want to go in and add, my specific, not interest, but my specific angle on things. So
Sure.
I might get something from AI, but then everything is then put into Canva, where I am then taking my knowledge, my experience to craft what I want as a final product.
Well, thank you so much for getting into the weeds a little bit on the specific tools. I think it's really helpful for education leaders like you to share what you're dabbling with, what you're experimenting with, what is working. And I hope that is helpful for education leaders listening. I know, just to throw one more example into the mix, and I know you've got many, you talked about synthesizing a large amount of data into a tight report. And I've seen something very similar. I know one of the banes of existence for principals and building leaders is writing formal evaluations of teacher performance. And I've seen AI take 4 or 5 observations, classroom observations, and synthesize them into one formal report. And I think that's the kind of thing, as you just spoke to, that can really save education leaders some serious time. Thank you for joining us, educators. If you're finding value here, make sure to give the video a like. Continuing on a little bit with AI, Eric, many educators feel overwhelmed by the velocity of change right now. You spoke to the polarization that is out there. How can leaders help staff move from AI anxiety to a little bit more optimism and fluency? And to be clear, we're not talking about sort of blind acceptance of anything, but just a little bit more confidence when they enter this AI space.
Yeah. And, I like to go back to just the principles of effective leadership. And here's the thing, everybody, I always say this, when I get on stage or do a workshop or presentation, nothing out of my mouth is new. If anyone says that this stuff is new, not being truthful with you. Now, is AI new? Yes. Technology? Yes. Research on the brain? Yes. But effective teaching is effective teaching. Effective leadership is effective leadership. Learning is learning. Those 3 things have not changed, everybody. The environment might have changed. When we think about the AI anxiety to optimism and fluency, it's really, as leaders, it's how you really establish a shared vision. What is your shared vision for AI? And hopefully that vision is, how will it support and enhance what you're already doing, and how will it save time? How do you effectively communicate not only the pitfalls, but the positive aspects? When you think about your role as a teacher leader, building leader, division or district leader, how do you use reflection to think about your own practice? And, John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience. We learn when we reflect on experience. And that reflection should help you to work to develop that consensus. We never want to say you must use AI. I always tell educators, I could care less if you use AI. But if I'm able to show you something that you find value in, go for it. But I am not here to tell you that you need to be AI literate, that you need to use AI. That's not my role. The role of leadership isn't to tell people what to do. It's to take them where they need to be. And another thing about leadership, as leaders, we don't change people. We create the conditions where people want to change. That is true leadership. How do you do that? You model. So I think when we look at moving past that anxiety, don't ask others to do what you're not willing to do or have not done yourself. The aspect of modeling is critical. And, last week I was modeling for leaders with teachers. And after I had them map out, hey, share with me what you're doing in your math block, your ELA block, or your science period. And when they gave it all to me, I was able to identify the strategies that were missing. And then I used questions to kind of drive them to their own conclusion of where they could grow and improve. But then I'm like, hey, I see that, you mentioned that you didn't have a review of prior learning. Let me show you how with the standard, I can create an easy, moderate, challenging multiple choice question aligned to the state assessments that your students are going to see, where you can naturally embed that into your lesson in a couple minutes. And they're just like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I could do that. I had one teacher bring me the workbook that they were using. Now, to me, that's not a lesson. So we took a picture of the workbook and then we said, okay, let's find the standard alignment. Then, once I had the picture in AI, we were able to develop a hook. We were able to develop a scaffolded closure task. Biggest anxiety with educators is data. So when we think about all the tools that are out there, iReady, iExcel, Waggle, you just, again, fill in the blank. If I have the diagnostic data, oh my goodness, I can take that screenshot with no student names. And then when I show teachers what they can then do, creating stations, creating a must do, may do, creating a closure task based on where the students are struggling. For me, I'm modeling for the teachers, but also for the leaders. So I think that is key. Lastly, is, I talked about becoming the learner in chief with the AI assisted pedagogical leadership. And I think it's really critical for school leaders to share success stories, to share the practical nature of how teachers are saving time, but improving the lessons that they've already developed. So there's just some ideas, but I think the modeling is critical.
You frequently talk about how pedagogy should trump technology. You've talked about it here. What is the biggest mistake, Eric, that you see schools making right now when adopting new AI tools without a solid pedagogical foundation? I'm sure you've seen some schools and districts maybe rushing into some of these spaces without thinking through how their practices are aligning with their values.
Yeah. So I always try to stress that when I speak, these are my opinions. And,
Yeah.
my opinion is where I'm seeing the same mistakes that we've been making since technology began to be infused into the classroom, whether it's
Right.
going one to one, bring your own device, not having the job embedded, research based, ongoing professional learning support in place first. And again, I see a lot of stuff about AI this, AI fluency, but I always encourage people to pull away the layers. And how can you identify the effective strategy? Can you identify how this is supporting higher level thinking? Is there alignment to standards? How is data being used to group, regroup, target instruction, differentiate? So I think it's about asking the right questions, because we've learned, coming back to where we started in the beginning of the conversation, just putting technology in the classroom and expecting students to learn is a fallacy. And AI is not this magic bullet. Yes, it can save time, but it's that human experience that is of utmost importance. So when we think about, I'll use station rotation as an example. I love station rotation, not just at the elementary level, but at the middle and the high school level. Why? Because I feel as a tier two strategy, if teachers can truly identify the students where they're at and provide that targeted instruction for a certain amount of time, that's how we're going to grow our students, not just students that are below standard, but those that are at and above. But if you don't know how to set up sound stations, if you don't know what those tasks should be, if you're not aligning to a standard, if you don't have a timer, if you don't have a closure task that measures the efficacy of that, well, the AI is not going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes to, again, the support that is provided, and that is shared ownership. If leaders want teachers to embrace technology, then they need to understand the right amount of support. And by support, you know, my opinion is the day long workshops, people don't really have the appetite or the time for that anymore. So I really advocate in my work through my consultancy is a micro learning approach. Let's focus on one strategy. and let's really do that one strategy really, really well. And that one strategy could look different for different grade levels of teachers, different schools, different administrators. But without that solid pedagogical foundation, AI will just, be in a long list of technology tools that have been thrown at schools where they have not led to any type of efficacy in terms of improving outcomes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Listener, viewer, if you're ready for more conversations like this one, make sure you subscribe to Teachers on Fire. Uh, Eric, let's throw it back to your previous book and ask this question. How can educators and leaders promote the kind of disruptive thinking necessary to future-proof our learners for an unpredictable world? It just feels even more unpredictable today than it ever has.
Yeah, I actually just watched a video this morning of what it was like to be a student growing up in 1994. And that's kind of
Yeah.
like for me, and we're talking about going to Blockbuster, setting a time to meet your friends if you
Yes.
weren't there and they just left you, all fighting for the one rotary phone and all this stuff. Here's the thing, everybody, the world's been disruptive when we had the 8-track cassette, 8-track tape, the CD-ROM, the Apple IIe, the Commodore 64, Atari. Technology has been a main catalyst for disruption. But we also have other forces in play that I'm not going to mention because that could ruffle some feathers. But disruption is a part of life, everybody. COVID probably was the most disruptive force to impact education because we weren't prepared. And I think we're kind of seeing some parallels right now when we look at this AI world and how it is shifting work. Some jobs will be displaced, but they're going to be replaced by new jobs. And the premise of disruptive thinking is, how do we help our students replace conventional ideas with innovative solutions to authentic problems?
Mm.
And if we look at that definition, it doesn't involve technology, but authentic problems are always going to be here. How are we proactive? And that really relies on, again, getting our students to be able to think, the ability to self-regulate, to assess their own learning, communicate and collaborate both in physical and virtual spaces. So when we look at the work, we have to ask ourselves, in our classrooms, our schools, our systems, are we preparing students for the present and the future, or are we preparing them for a world that no longer exists? And I always compel teachers and administrators to look in the mirror, because what I feel is our ability to exhibit self-efficacy is the key to success, both in the classroom, in the system, in our world. And if we can look in the classroom and say, you know what, I am preparing students for a world that we cannot predict. That's kind of what, hey, that's where we start. So those are just some of my thoughts.
I like the authentic problems piece because that's one of my thoughts when it comes to AI use is we need to help students continue to localize and personalize their work. And when they're solving problems right there in their building or in their community, that's something that AI will never will never replace, right? That kind of thinking that actually impacts people around them. Last question, or one of the last questions here for you, Eric. You've noted that innovating can feel incredibly isolating. What advice do you have for that educator out there who feels entirely alone in their particular context, in their push for meaningful, sustainable change?
Yeah, first off, it is natural to feel alone when you are walking down the path that's least traveled.
Mm.
And that means you're onto something, everybody. Why? Because most people don't like change. The only groups that like change at scale are wet babies that need their diaper removed. But when we think about change, our brains are wired to keep us in a state of comfort and to avoid fear. Comfort is the enemy of progress. And fear, we're so afraid we might fail. So what we have to start to do first is, how do we create a narrative of moving past our comfort zone so we're not complacent, but also how do we tackle our fears? I like the quote by Zig Ziglar: fear, forget everything and run, or
Mm.
face everything and rise.
Mm.
And, one of the things too is coming back to kind of looking in the mirror, when we think about our practice, our role, if you are a teacher or a leader, your role is to help your students learn or to support your staff. And, when the comfort and fear zones are often dictated by how others perceive us, and we are so influenced by what other people think. So being alone means you do not really care what other people think, and that's important. But the whole then idea is how then do you get them to be these partners with you? And I always look at change as kind of like a domino effect. I had 5 teachers that were willing to buck the status quo to create a new status quo. And I learned with those 5 teachers. We learned how to unlearn and relearn. And it was important for me as the principal to be a co-learner with them. And then what could I do as a leader? My job was to clear the runway. My job was, what do you need to be successful? And whether it was hardware, software, release time, PD. But then the key was, how could we connect that to improving outcomes? This is where, I always say, when you hear somebody speak, when you read a book, when you're looking at blogs, again, always ask yourself, okay, this sounds great, but where is the evidence? So if you're feeling alone, your ability to share qualitative and quantitative evidence of how your practices, everyone's great at telling us what they're doing awesome. And what I'll do is I'll like, hey, that sounds awesome. Then I'll say, hey, can you show me what this looks like? Because I want to actually take that idea and share it with all the other schools and systems I'm working with across the world. Because I think our ability to share and showcase, to then also leverage the voices of our students, the voices of trusted colleagues, to really begin to move from those isolated pockets of excellence, those islands, to where the ones that are not doing it, the 5% that give us 95% of the problems, where those people then are on islands because they don't want to change and do what's in the best interest of kids. Often as humans, let's be honest, we do what's in our best interests. And that doesn't mean we're ineffective. I don't deal with good, bad, effective, ineffective. Here's the thing, everybody, knowing where we are to get to where we need to be to better support our students. That's the key. And I always say, because everyone is like, oh, it's another thing we have to do. I'm overwhelmed. I get that. The key to change, Tim, is the small shifts to practice done consistently. Small shifts to practice. Don't fall victim to innovation. Oh my God, I got to use technology. I got to use AI. Innovation to one teacher could be consistently implementing exit tickets as a way to determine if the lesson was successful. Innovation could be clarity in the form of standards aligned learning targets with strategies that are aligned. Innovation is new, different, but a result. So it's how people get so polarized by words, and our minds kind of set us up for, again, that state of protecting ourselves. But if you feel you're on an island, I'm going to say you're probably going down the right path. But share that evidence. Find your trusted network. Reach out. Hey, anyone listening today, you can share your stuff with me. And if I see it and I'm like, wow, this is great, I will amplify it for you. I will give you feedback. But if you're on that island, you have to know that you have people, whether it's in your class, your school, your district, your division, that are there to support you. And the key piece again is that evidence, in my opinion. Tim, I think you're muted. Tim. I can't hear you.
Thank you for that. That was a bit of a throwback to COVID right there. I was going to say the themes of clarity and intention and purpose just ring so consistently throughout your work, and that came out there again as well. So thank you so much for that. Eric, as we wind down, where are the best places for Teachers on Fire to connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, so my website, ericsheninger.com, one-stop shop. I blog every other week, and I mix it, match it between teacher perspective, teacher work, and leader work. I have a fledgling podcast, all audio, that I do every other week as well. But Pinterest, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Mastodon, Blue Sky. I'm in all. I'm even on TikTok and Snapchat, but I don't know. I haven't been able to get into those, but I'm pretty much everywhere, everybody.
And Eric, you've put out so many great titles. Here are a few of them. I think your most recent one, again, is Personalized, Meeting the Needs of All Learners. Have you got another one in the works that you can tell us about?
I have a plan for
Okay.
a book. I always say that when I'm done a book, it's going to be my last book. And by the way, everyone, if you think you can't write, that's all mindset. I never thought I'd be an author, but after people visited from all over the world to see what my teachers were doing, that's when I got motivated to say, hey, I need to share this. And, I am working on more of I don't want to say traditional, but really the nuts and bolts of leadership. So that's kind of the premise, but I'm not going to share the title or the aspects yet because I'm still mapping out that table of contents.
Well, that was just a bit of a gut feeling there that maybe something else was cooking, and there it is. So we'll look forward to it, Eric. Thank you so much, again, for sharing your thoughts with the podcast today. This conversation has been so good for my mind, and it's provoked my thinking for sure. Teachers on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you too decided to spend some of your day watching this video or listening to the audio-only version of the podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard today from Eric Sheninger sparked your thinking and ignited your practice, and I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, everyone, and have a great week.